did President Bush make a phone call? And I think, again, what Mr. Wolf is suggesting, and I think you know, sometimes thinking outside the box while working inside the box as robustly as possible helps yield a result. The Danforth team, obviously Bush's team, brings another layer of people who were there when many of these things were hammered out. So did George Bush make a call? But more importantly, will you engage him even more thoroughly?
Well, I will certainly take the engagement of former President Bush back to the Secretary for further consideration. It was former Secretary Rice who tried to engage President Kiir. Former President Carter did as well.
Okay. Let me just ask a couple of questions. Again, if you could get back to us, you know, perhaps by early next week on how well, I mean, time is of the essence. I mean, there was an article in Voice of America a day ago about Malakal deserted, destroyed in New South Sudan fighting. The article points out, and I'm sure you know this, that Oxfam has pulled out and said that the streets were littered with bodies. And the comment was made in the article, fighting resumed in Malakal, the capital of the largest oil-producing state in South Sudan, weeks after the two sides in the conflict signed a cessation of hostilities agreement. Certainly it hasn't reached that town and many, many others. So again, a sense of urgency. You might want to comment on this, because I know many of our witnesses do call and make very persuasive argument on the need, and you said it as well, of being able to get humanitarian workers in. People are being killed, absolutely innocent women, men, and children who happen to be Sudanese or visitors there, perhaps even some Americans. But now we have Oxfam and others pulling out. So if you could maybe speak to that now, Mr. Ambassador. That's terrible.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clearly, both sides have not respected the cessation of hostilities agreement that they signed. Fighting continued after that agreement was signed in late January in Addis. There were attacks on the towns in Lear, in Unity State, and other areas, in Gadiang, in Jonglei State, by the government forces. And then, as you rightly mentioned, last week there was the attack on Malakal by the opposition forces. One of the critical things to make the cessation of hostilities a reality is to deploy the monitoring and verification mechanism that IGAD had foreseen in the cessation of hostilities agreement. And we have been working day and night with them. I have seconded a member of my staff to work with the IGAD mediation to get that team established. They have been into South Sudan. They have visited numerous sites where the teams will operate out of. They have verified that it is indeed possible for those teams to operate. We're working on a memorandum of understanding with the UN mission in South Sudan to provide some support to that team. And just this week, money that we had made available was put on a contract to provide the services and support needed for those teams to deploy. So I understand the headquarters team will deploy this week to Juba, and as the other staff are brought on board from IGAD member states and international partners, the monitoring and verification teams will be out there. Now, these are monitoring teams, and they will not be able to enforce the cessation of hostility. The enforcement will really come primarily from the political clout of the region, the countries in the region that both parties in South Sudan will need to live with and deal with. And so the premise of the monitoring and verification mechanism is that once good information is available, the presidents of the countries in the region will be able to intervene to ensure that those violations stop.
You have said that ominous signs in South Sudan have been visible for quite some time. Matter of fact, on February 7th, you, in remarks before the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, you suggested that, including internal political tensions, shrinking political space, and intercommunal tensions. In light of the U.S. commitment to the world's newest country, what can we do differently now to address these issues that we have not done previously, and what new direction is likely to succeed at this point?
Mr. Chairman, I think as you mentioned, there were signs that there was closing political space in the country. We and others in the international community engaged with the government to try to reverse that, to slow that down. I personally was in Juba in early December and was very active in lobbying the government to modify an NGO bill that they were on the verge of passing, trying to keep the space open. I also spoke out about the need for space for press freedom at that time. Now, clearly, the issue is not sort of what more might have been done, but what can we do to avoid a repetition of this. And this is why the IGAD mediators, with our full support and encouragement, have proposed that there be a very broad dialogue going forward, that the solution to the crisis in South Sudan is not going to be one that is a stitch-up between a couple of politicians to decide who gets what share of power, but rather something that is going to involve the civil society of South Sudan, the religious leaders, the traditional leaders, the business community, women, youth, as well as the political class, as well as the political parties, in order to look at the issues of how South Sudan should be governed. There is already a constitutional process underway that needs to be revised and reinvigorated. That's one of the proposals from the IGAD mediation. There are also proposals that this discussion needs to look at some of the contributing causes to the current conflict, such as the security sector. The SPLA became a military force which continued to grow after independence as more and more militias were incorporated. Can the security sector be reformed so that you don't have an army that at the first sign of trouble will fracture, as the SPLA did on the night of the 15th of December and subsequently? Issues of financial accountability, transparency, allocation of resources that the government does have, and how do they actually get out to benefit more broadly the people of South Sudan. Those are all issues that have been put on the table by IGAD. We fully support that, and we believe that by addressing all of those issues with a broad range of stakeholders from South Sudan to reach a consensus, or at least a sufficient consensus among those stakeholders on the way forward will be what will address these ongoing issues. There will also be a need, frankly, for an accountability and a reconciliation process. People need to know what was done. Those most responsible for gross violations of human rights will need to face justice, but there will above all need to be a reconciliation process among the communities. This is something that has been an issue in South Sudan, is tensions between ethnic groups. It's an issue that we were working on before the conflict. We spent a lot of time, particularly over this past summer, in dealing with the crisis in Jonglei State, which was a conflict there between ethnic groups. And we will continue to try to work on this issue of reconciliation.
Mr. Pastor, are faith leaders actively involved in the reconciliation part and the pursuit of peace? Are they included in the discussions?
Most definitely. In fact, there were a number of the religious leaders from South Sudan who came to Addis Ababa to talk with the mediators, to talk with the delegations that were there. When I was in Juba in late December, I met with several of the religious leaders and was probing with them for their views and how they might be able to contribute. The religious community has long been a respected pillar of South Sudanese society, and I think definitely needs to be part of any ongoing efforts at both reconciliation, but also at the issue, addressing the issues of governance and the Constitution.
Mr. Akwe from Amnesty International points out that Darfur is awash in small arms, and he says that the UN Security Council needs to immediately expand the current UN arms embargo to cover the whole of Sudan in order to stop military and related supplies reaching all parties to the conflict in Darfur. Is that something that you're looking at? Do you think should be done?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is indeed something that we think should be done, and it is something that we have proposed in New York in the Security Council. We have unfortunately not had cooperation from some of the other permanent members of the Security Council, and so we have not been able to succeed in expanding that. But we believe that the arming of so many people in Darfur is indeed what is contributing now not just to the organized fighting between tribes, but also the general lawlessness in the area.
Among as many suggestions and recommendations, Mr. Prendergast points out that Eritrea needs to be investigated. Let me do his exact quote so I get it right. For its support of the opposition forces, are arms flowing from Eritrea?
We have certainly heard those allegations, and we are trying to verify whether there's any reality to them. They have been brought to our attention by the number of governments in the region. There's certainly a concern about regionalization of this conflict. And it's not just Eritrea, but it's the potential for this conflict, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, to spread because of the fundamental interests that the neighboring countries have in the region. And so we're working very hard to try to get this conflict contained without the intervention of outside forces.
Dr. Farris, in his testimony, suggests that there needs to be presidential statements on the crisis. And I've read both of those that have been posted on the White House website. And they were good, but one was 2 paragraphs, one was 4. Not much length to it, and length doesn't necessarily convey the lack of substance, but it suggested to me that more could have been there. But he asked for that, but he also says that there should be an invitation to representatives from both sides, or factions, I should say, to come to Washington for consultations with the goal of finding a definitive solution to the divisions. Sometimes you take a group out of, and certainly Addis is at least out of Sudan, but sometimes when you come even a further distance, it has the consequence of sharpening the mind. I mean, we've done that with so many players from so many different countries over the years, including Northern Ireland. When the disparate parties there would meet here, all of a sudden things were improved. Is that something you're looking at?
We believe the IGAD mediation, which is being led by former Foreign Minister Seyum Mesfin, as well as General Sombewo, who led the CPA process, are doing an outstanding job. We have been fully supportive of them, and we have been working very closely with them. There is a danger in opening sort of multiple channels of negotiation, and that you open then the parties up to forum shopping. So we, at this point, are committed to supporting the IGAD mediation, and we will continue to do so as long as it continues to make progress and has the trust of both parties.
Well, frankly, I'm not suggesting multiple venues. I mean, he is recommending, and it sounded like it had some merit to it, that the idea of bringing people here, perhaps to the White House, you know, where things could be, the ball could be moved further down the field.
Well, we're certainly open to all ideas, and we can take that under advisement.
Appreciate that. Could you also tell me when the last time you briefed the President personally on matters relating, was it in the Oval Office or was it by phone, and when was that?
I believe the date was the 24th of January, and it was in the Oval Office.
And is it your recommendation that the President should call the players, including Salva Kiir?
We've had many calls to Salva Kiir, as well as to Riek Machar, by senior administration officials, and we're calibrating when we need to use which official to try to move an issue at the particular time. So that's something that's certainly on the table and will be used when we consider that that would be the best way forward at that time to move us off of a sticking point or otherwise break any logjam.
But again, the fact that Oxfam has vacated one of the larger cities, things are not moving, certainly not in the direction as fast as we would like. I don't think we wear out our welcome if the President makes that phone call. I really don't. You know, maybe multiple phone calls would be advisable. So please take that back if you would. Mr. Cicilline.